Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about A Christmas Carol. So we are reading through Stave 4, The Last of the Spirits. And in the last video, I had read through this paragraph here, but I hadn't explained it. So I'll just do that now. And so old Joe is the owner of the shop that these people, these 12 women and a man have arrived. And we're going to find out what's going on in a minute. And he's just making small talk, saying, come into the front room. And this means that you've always been welcome here. You've had the freedom of the place. And similarly, the other two aren't strangers either. Stop till I shut the door. Squeak is just an old spelling for screech. So the door is making a screeching noise. And here he's just being funny here. How bits some of the metal bits are rusty and noisy, and he's making a joke about his age as well. And then here, this line here, he's saying, "Don't worry about being here. We're all basically a bit dodgy." Obviously, he wouldn't call himself dodgy. They say, "Don't worry about being here," because they were a bit shy of being in front of each other. These three people who have arrived at the same time without meaning to. Come in, come in. Okay, so let's carry on. The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That's true indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." Okay, so the parlor, the sitting room, is not really a separate room. It's just the space behind the screen of rags. Rake means to move around, to make the fire, to kind of make it light properly, to work properly, with an old stair rod. So a stair rod is like a metal rod that you use to keep your stair carpet in place. And trim means to cut his smoky lamp. So the lamp obviously is like a candle. It's not an electric lamp. So you have to cut the bit. Otherwise you get smoke. Okay. And I mean, you don't need to worry too much about that. But he doesn't cut it properly with a knife or scissors. He just kind of, I guess, hits it with his pipe. The the stem of his pipe means the end of his pipe. And while he's doing this, the woman who had spoken, she throws her bundle on the floor, and flaunting means showing off. And then she looks with brave challenge at the other two. So, but this flaunting and this defiance, she's just pretending. The point is that they're all a little bit ashamed of being here, and we'll find out why they're ashamed in a minute. And she says to the other woman, so this doesn't really mean anything. She's saying, "Oh, what's the problem? What's the problem? Every person has a right to look after themselves. He always did." So obviously, this is Scrooge, okay? And the other woman agrees that, yeah. "Why then, don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. "We should hope not." "Very well, then," cried the woman. "That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. "If he wanted to keep 'em after he was dead, a wicked old screw," pursued the woman, "why hasn't he natural in his lifetime? Why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself." "It's the truest word that ever was spoke," said Mrs. Dilber. "It's a judgment on him." "I wish it was a little heavier judgment," replied the woman, "and it should have been. You may depend upon it. If I could have laid my hands on anything else, open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. Okay, so this page, on the one hand, sorry, we stopped here, is fairly straightforward, but it is confusing because we don't know what's going on. And basically, what's going on is that these people used to work for Scrooge, cleaning woman, laundry woman. The man, we don't know what he did exactly. And they've stolen things from him after he's died. Okay. So, so she's just saying, oh, don't stand there like you're scared. Who's the white? No one will know. And this line here is not meant to be taken literally. It's just saying we're not going to criticize each other. It's just a metaphor, an old saying in those days. And they all agree that they're not. And then she says, so what's the problem? Nobody's worse off for losing a few small things like this, and especially not a dead man. So Scrooge is dead, so he's not going to miss these things. And they all agree and they laugh. And then she says, if he wanted to keep them after he was dead, so this word here in the old days meant a stingy person, okay? Then he should have been more like normal people. He should have been more natural, more nice. And if he had been nice, then after he died, um, he would have had somebody to look after him. And from here, we can see that Scrooge died alone, gasping for breath, okay? And they all agree and they all sort of say, oh, I mean, they're all justifying themselves. Obviously, no one should steal from a dead person, no matter how bad that person is, but they're just trying to justify themselves and make themselves feel better. And they're sort of implying that God and heaven has put this judgment on Scrooge for his bad things. That in a way, they're almost trying to convince themselves that they're carrying out God's work. Obviously, that's not quite true, really. And then the woman is saying, yeah, actually, it should have been even worse for him. And it would have been worse if I could have stolen more things. And she says, open the bundle, Joe. Let me know how much you're going to give me for it. Speak plainly. And I'm not afraid to be the first to go out of the three people. And I don't care if they see what I've got. And here she's saying, actually, we used to steal from him before anyway, even when he was alive. And it's no sin. Well, it is a sin, but she's trying to convince herself that it's not a sin to steal from Scrooge after he's dead. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive: a seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found there was nothing more to come. But the gallantry, so gallantry means being nice or brave or chivalrous, but this is all metaphorical language. So they don't let her go first. So in fact, the man goes first, and mounting the breach first. This is more of a metaphor, really. I mean, mount means to climb. Breach means like a defensive barrier. But here it's just being used metaphorically to say that he decides to go first, and he produces the things that he's stolen. So plunder means stolen things, and it wasn't big, but there wasn't a lot, a seal or two. So remember, a seal is some kind of a symbol that these merchants would use to identify their things, their documents. But this might have been made of some kind of a metal or something, so it would have some value. And we know this guy Ocho buys and sells metal, scrap metal. And then these are obviously fairly straightforward. This word is spelt brooch, but it's pronounced brooch, and that's not worth much either. And the Ojo examines them. This means to value. He values them, and he writes them in chalk somewhere. Disposed means inclined or willing to give for each of them. So he chalks it up on the wall and then adds it up into a total. That's your account, said Joe, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, two old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. Okay, so he says, all right, that's how much I'm going to give you, and I'm not going to give you another sixpence, even if you boil me. And then who's next? And then Mrs. Dilber goes next, so that's fairly straightforward. Apparel means clothes, and sugar tongs are something you use to pick up sugar cubes. And he gives her the same, he does the same thing with her, and then tells her how much he's going to pay her. And then here he's obviously being funny. You can imagine he wouldn't give any more to anybody, right? And he certainly wouldn't ruin himself for anybody. And he says, if you ask me for another penny and try to bargain, I will regret being so generous and actually cut down, reduce how much I'm going to give you. By the way, this when he mentions the seals, so from here we can maybe work out what can we work out from here. This the man wearing black. How would he know Scrooge? Do you think he must be a fellow businessman, isn't it? Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's just something interesting to think about. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out. For the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman coolly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. Okay, so this page is fairly straightforward. So the first woman now, and Joe bends down to untie the bundle, and he says, "What, bed curtains?" And she says, "Yes, it's bed curtains." And he says, "Oh, you don't mean you took them down with rings and all?" She says, "Why not?" And then here he's being funny, saying, "Oh, you'll take any opportunity to make money." And this means that I won't hold back. I won't hold back my hand, metaphorically speaking, if I can get something by reaching out for it, by making a bit of effort. And certainly I won't hold back for the sake of such a man as he was. And then she just says, "Oh, don't be careful, don't drop that oil and make the blankets dirty." So that's very straightforward. His blankets? Asked Joe. Whose else's do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say. I hope he didn't. Oh, and so she's taken not just his bed curtains, but also his blankets from his bed. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so frightened of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Ah, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Okay, and then from here, because she took his blankets as well, and she makes a joke saying, well, he won't need blankets where he is in his coffin. But now old Joe's a bit worried. He says, "Oh, he didn't die of any kind of disease, is he? So he's worried that the virus or whatever might be on the blankets. And she says, no, don't worry, that I wouldn't have, if he did have some kind of a disease, I wouldn't have hung around him. I wasn't that, I didn't like him so much that I would hang around him if he had some kind of an infectious disease. And now we see that she also took his shirt and she says, don't worry, you won't find any holes in it. It's not worn out. It's the best shirt he had. And then she says, oh, they were going to waste it. And he says, what do you mean? And she says, oh, they were going to bury him in his best shirt. And she laughs and saying that somebody had actually put his best shirt on him, but she took it off. So she took off his shirt from the dead body. This is what she thinks of him. But also, I suppose it does show that obviously she's a bit of a nasty piece of work, let's be honest. But anyway, and then instead of that shirt, she puts a different shirt made of calico, which is a cheaper kind of cotton. And she's saying, well, that's more than good enough to bury a dead body in. And that, yeah, she's just saying, oh, he couldn't look uglier any if you tried. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror, as they sat grouped about their spoil, in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. Ha ha! Laughed the same woman, when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened every one away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Ha ha! Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this? He recoiled in horror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched the bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. Okay, so obviously Scrooge listens in horror, and this here is talking about the three people, well, the four people actually, the three visitors and the owner. Spoil means stolen goods. Scanty, small amount of light from the old man's lamp, old Joe's lamp. And Scrooge watches all these people with hate. So detestation means hate and disgust. And he's saying, which couldn't have been more if they had been obscene demons. Obscene means nasty, horrible demons. So you know what demons means. Marketing the corpse itself. So selling the dead body. So corpse means dead body. So in other words, he wouldn't have looked at them more hatefully if they had been selling his dead body, let alone the bits and pieces that they've stolen from him. And the woman keeps laughing, and then Joe pulls out a bag, like a flannel means some kind of cloth, maybe cotton cloth bag with money in it, and then counts out the money he's going to pay them their gains, their ill-gotten gains. And this means that this is the end of Scrooge's life. This is the result of his life. That he frightened away everybody when he was alive. So, and he could have given his things, his money to his nephew, to his employee, to his friend, to the people who knew him. But instead, it's going to profit. The money is going to go to people after he's dead, to these people, to these servants and so on, who have stolen from him after his death. Okay. And spirit, says Scrooge, and he's now shuddering, shaking. And he starts to realize that obviously it's him. And he says, yes, I agree. That is the way my life is right now. And obviously implying that he's going to change his ways. And now something even worse happens. So recoil means to kind of pull back in surprise or fear. In this case, terror. So the scene changes suddenly. And now he's at his bed, his own bedside, after his death. And uncurtained. Why is it uncurtained? Because the woman has stolen the curtains, doesn't she? And ragged means rough. And underneath, obviously, is his dead body. Now, dumb, sometimes we use that word to mean stupid, but technically it means something that doesn't speak. So obviously he's dead, so he's not going to speak, but it announces itself in awful language. So the dead body. So this is just metaphorical language that Scrooge is horrified and terrified to be standing by his bedside, where he's looking down on his own dead body. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwashed, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death! Set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honoured head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy, and will fall down when it is released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous, and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, and the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal. Okay, let's just go back here. So the room was very dark. He couldn't really see much, but he kind of looks around for some reason. He wants to know what kind of room it is. There's a pale light from outside coming onto the bed, and on the bed, plundered and bereft. So plundered means stolen from, and bereft also means when things are taken away from you. And the word bereft normally has very negative connotations. Is, for example, when somebody dies, you feel bereft of them. Okay, unwatched, unwept. So nobody is crying for this person, this body, uncared for, was the body of this man. So this is obviously Scrooge's dead body lying on the bed. So Scrooge looks at the ghost, the spirit, and the spirit is pointing to the head of the dead body. And the cover is very carelessly thrown. And if you just touch the cover, if Scrooge were to just touch the covering on the face, disclose means to show, okay, the cloth would move away and you'd be able to see the face. And then he thinks about it and how easy it would be, and he kind of wants to do it, but he can't. Okay, and so he had no more power to withdraw, to take away the veil, the covering from the face, than he could get rid of the ghost. So we know he has no power to command the spirits. So in that same way, he can't bring himself to uncover the face. Now, this paragraph here is really, really important. We're going to go through it in detail. It's very poetic and metaphorical, so don't try to translate it too literally, all right? And it's not totally clear what it means, but we'll try and do the best we can. Remember that when something is confusing, you can turn it to your advantage by giving multiple interpretations in your essay. So first of all, this line here in itself, or this phrase, lots here, double alliteration, cold, cold, dreadful death, listing, repetition, exclamation. So he's talking to death. Now, when you talk to, there's a technique for that. It's called apostrophe, not the punctuation mark, but the same spelling. And it's where you're talking to something that can't hear you, some abstract idea or an object or somebody who's not there. He's saying, altar means where you worship. So he's saying, or the narrator is saying, make your place here that death can be altered, and make yourself as terrifying as you can, because this is your area of power and authority. but of the but don't touch the head, because the eyes are sacred. Yeah, that's why we always cover the face and the eyes of the dead. Don't touch a hair on its head, or make any feature of the face odious, meaning nasty or horrible. Okay, and he's saying that, comparing it to the hand. So he's saying the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. The heart and pulse have stopped. Okay, so they're fine, but compared to the head, they're not as important. Now this is a bit confusing. Maybe it means that Scrooge was once so open and generous and true, but is no longer, and that his heart was once brave and warm and tender, but it isn't anymore. But the point is, it's a man's pulse, a human being's pulse. Or also, these two lines could mean that Scrooge can become these things later on. Okay, and that interpretation possibly makes sense, because then these words possibly make sense, that when these words mean that the narrator is talking to the third spirit and saying, not hit, but like, strike now, do your work now, give Scrooge a chance now to change and become these things, these good things. Okay, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal. And if you do that, if you give him a chance, he will do these good deeds. Okay, and sow means when you put seeds on the ground to grow, and he will make good things grow in the world. I mean, this is a bit confusing as well, but life immortal, meaning talking about Jesus Christ and everlasting life and so on. In other words, if you do good things according to Christianity, you will go to heaven and live forever, have everlasting life. Okay, so that's what that might mean. Okay, so a difficult paragraph there, but hopefully I've given you some ideas to think about. And then we'll just finish this video with this last paragraph. No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares. They have brought him to a rich end, truly. And he's saying, no one, he knows that nobody's actually speaking, but he can hear these words, right, in his head. And he thinks, if this man could rise up now, and he's obviously talking about Scrooge himself, what would be his first thoughts, foremost thoughts? Greed, hard dealing, so hard business deals, trying to get the most for himself and not caring about the other person. Griping means complaining. And he's saying all of these qualities have brought him to this end. In other words, dead in bed, alone and uncared for. Okay, so we'll stop there and carry on in the next video with Stave 4, and just end with this slide as always. I hope you found that video useful. So please do subscribe and tell all your friends, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll carry on with Stave 4.